Blog Talk Radio.
Me chiamo apura kanu apurai kaitnut neye ujira da medinde Odwirafo Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan Akwamuman Amaruka Atifi mu Odwirafo Odwiraman mu. Greetings to all apurakani apurai kaitnut people, meaning Africans, black people. Today is Odwira Day, Purification Day. My name is Odwirafo Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan, Odwirafo of the Akwamu nation in North America, within Odwiraman, the purified nation, Apurakani Apurai Kaitni, people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I say we thank you once again for tuning into the broadcast. We've opened up the chat room. If you have any questions or comments and you'd like to interact in the chat room, you must log in as a user in order to interact. If you have any questions or comments on the phone line, simply hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised. For those who are new to the broadcast, we have 4 broadcasts on a weekly basis. We have Akan for Nanasom, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion on Joda on Monday nights, where we deal specifically with the Akan expression of Nanasom. First and foremost, because we are Akan. Secondly, because of the misinformation being propagated regarding Akan, cosmology, ancestral religion, culture, ritual practice, and so forth. So we deal with our ancestral origins from ancient Kanat, ancient Nubia, which is the title of ancient Nubia. Our people migrated from ancient Kanat, some of our people 2,000 years ago after the fall of Kemet and northern Kanat, Egypt and northern Nubia, migrated west, reestablished ourselves in the western part of the continent of Africa, reestablished the Kanat Empire, the Nubian Empire, the Ghana Empire a couple of thousand years ago. Centuries later, because of Muslim invasion, some of our people moved further south and reestablished ourselves in the forest belt and savanna regions of what is today's Ivory Coast and Ghana. Hundreds of years subsequent to that, some of our people were taken as prisoners of war during the Musuo Kessier the Great perversity of the enslavement era from those regions and forced into North Central South America, the Caribbean, and Europe. And this is how we ended up in the Western Hemisphere. However, we maintained our ancestral religious traditions. Thus, Akan ancestral religion is called Winti in Suriname in South America from the Akan term Winti. Akan ancestral religion is called Obia in Jamaica from the Akan term Obai. In North America, in the United States, Akan ancestral religion is called Hoodoo from the Akan term Undu, meaning medicine from roots, trees, plant life. Undu also means to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession and spirit communication. We find these same definitions in the language and the writings of ancient Kemet and Kanat. In the Medutu, the hieroglyphs, the term Undu meaning medicine from roots, trees, plant life. Undu also meaning to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, spirit communication. Undu is also the term for the offerings we give to the deities at the shrines. The altar itself is also called a Undu, and the offerings are called the Undu, the hoodoo that we give to the deities. You find that in the Medutu, the hieroglyphs, as we have shown in our book, Hoodoo People. One of the titles of ancient Nubia is called the Undu land, and the people called the Undun people. So we have been using these terms for thousands of years across 2 continents, all the way into North America. So we deal with ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion born of our blood circles. We were guided by our ancestresses and ancestors and the deities, the Nananom Nsamanfo and the Abosom, on the best means by which to wage war against the whites and their offspring and force the end of enslavement in the Western Hemisphere, because we adhered to our ancestral religious practices, born of our blood circles, preserved in our blood circles, transmitted intergenerationally and transcarnationally through our blood circles here in the Western Hemisphere for hundreds of years. So this is what we deal with, proper notions of Akan ancestral religion, culture, the nature of the Abosom, the deities, the nature of the Nananom Nsamanfo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors and their relationship to us, and so forth. On Awukuda Wednesday night, we have Egwa Marketplace, where we showcase Afurakani businesses, organizations, and institutions, those who are positively impacting the Afro-Akani community, those who maintain their ancestral religious values in the process. We have published our Okom economic development model, which is an approach to economic development rooted in our ancestral religious values. Thus, we have a holistic approach to economic development, a key component of ancestry or nation building. So this is what we deal with on the Egwa Marketplace show. We've showcased a number of black businesses, organizations, and institutions, and we'll have more coming onto the show. We also have the Starve the Beast and Feed the Pride operation, which is part of our Okom economic development model. That means you make an assessment on a weekly basis to determine what funds you would have potentially wasted with the whites and their offspring, and then we starve the beast and feed the pride, reallocate those funds away from the white business and direct them to the business, organization, or institution of the week. We showcase one Afro-Akani business, organization, or institution per week for optimal capital infusion. Thus, when you starve the beast and feed the pride and reallocate $10 away from a white business that you would have spent at Walmart or some restaurant and redirect them to the business of the week, those funds, then that's a $10 transfer of capital. When 1,000 people are starving the beast and feeding the pride and supporting the business of the week, that's $10,000 being transferred from white businesses, our enemies, directly to a black business, which allows them, in the course of 7 days, a $10,000 infusion of capital to hire within the black community immediately and permanently, expand their product lines and their services to us so they can serve us at a greater capacity. It's a win-win situation across the board. If we do not engage with the process of starving the beast and feeding the pride on a weekly basis, then by default we leave not only that $10,000 but the $20 billion we spend on a weekly basis. We leave 95+% of that in the hands of our absolute enemies, the whites and their offspring. So we are financing our own oppression when we do not starve the beast and feed the pride. So that's what we deal with on the Egwa Marketplace show. On Yauda, which is Thursday, Yada Abada Thursday night, we have Sim Affairs of the Nation, where we deal with specific issues that confront us as an Oman, as a nation, specifically Odwiraman, the purified nation, Afro-Akani people in the Western Hemisphere. We have a proper understanding of what an Oman or nation is, so we deal with Amaniye nationism, the purification of nationalism, an approach to nation building and restoration rooted in our ancestral religious values. So we understand a nation is a living, breathing entity governed by specific forces in nature, just like your organs in your body are living, breathing entities, and they give birth to children, which are the cells. But those cells interface with one another harmoniously, but they also serve the greater organ of which they're a component part. We are cells as Afro-Akani people within a greater organal structure, which is an Oman, a nation, and the specific forces in nature, the Abosom that govern that collective of Afro-Akani people. We harmonize with those forces in creation so that we can interface with one another harmoniously as cells. We were directed, once we were forced into the Western Hemisphere, at some point to coalesce in a specific region of the Earth Mother's body, in this region of the Western Hemisphere, by our ancestresses and ancestors, blend ancestral blood circles in this region of the West, interface with the unique plant life, animal life, and mineral life here in the Western region of the Earth Mother's body, interface with the unique expression of the Earth Mother divinities, Asase and Asase in this region of their body in the Western Hemisphere, interface with the unique expression of the Abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, the forces in nature, the deities, as they manifest in this region of the Earth Mother's body, when that confluence of events, activities, allowed us to forge a locative identity, a unique expression of Afro-Akani culture, ritual nation building rooted in our collective as blending ancestral blood circles in this region of the Earth Mother's body. So we have a unique expression of culture, ancestral religious practice, and an approach to solving our issues as Afro-Akani people here in the West. We are Odwiraman, the purified Odwira Oman nation, mine, West, land of the setting sun. So we deal with Amaniye nationism, the purification of nationalism. And of course, in June, on June 24th, we have our third annual Odwiraman Afashe, Odwiraman Purified Nation Conference, the Purified Nation Afro-Akani people in the Western Hemisphere Conference, where we're dealing with Amaniye nationism, 7 principal values of nation building, restoration. We will have presenters dealing with the 7 principal values of nation building, restoration, establishing methods of food production and preservation, establishing methods of curing disease, establishing a military structure, establishing institutions for training, cultural, educational, military, and so forth, establishing sound systems of governance and jurisprudence, the building of homes on acquired land, the manufacturing of textiles. These 7 principal values of ancestral nation building will be addressing. We will also have our Egua marketplace vendors all day long. This is a free event open to Afro-Akani people only. We will also be giving away a free copy of our book, Odwiraman Afashe Volume 3, to all attendees. Of course, this is what we do at all of our conferences. They're always free. And then we give away a free copy of a book to everyone who attends. So that all-day event, free and open to Afro-Akani people only. It's a family event as well. Go to our Odwiraman Afashe page so that you can see the details with regard to that on the page and the list of presenters, and we will be updating that list of presenters as well. So that's what we have for the Amaruka Affairs of the Nation broadcast. Tonight is Odwira Purification. We deal with ancestral religion in general, not just the Akan expression, but ancestral religion in general, and how it impacts every aspect of our lives as Afro-Akani people. No matter where we exist in the world, on the continent or in the Western Hemisphere, ancestral religion is defined in essence as the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and thus realign ourselves with divine order. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance, these are the expansive and contractive poles of ancestral religion. We state that Odwira purification operationalizes Nanason. Purification operationalizes our practice of ritually incorporating law and ritually restoring balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions so that we can get back on track with aligning ourselves with order. Our culture, our way of life as Afro-Akani people is the divine acceptance, the law, the love of order, and the divine rejection, the hatred of disorder and its purveyors. When we make legitimate mistakes, then we engage the ritual process to incorporate law and restore balance so we can get back on track with aligning every thought, every intention, and every action, every moment of every day with divine order. Ancestral religion, purification is key to that process. So we deal with the purification of concept, purification of culture, purification of ritual practice, the misinformation that's been propagating with regarding ancestral religion and so forth. We deal with all of that on the Odwira broadcast. Tonight, we just want to wrap up this 3-part series that we started last week on AFU AUSAR, 16 symbol divination, the 16 parts of the body of AUSAR in relation to the 16 symbol divination. And of course, as we said earlier on the first 2 broadcasts, this is directly in alignment with last week on April 25th. That was the 16th anniversary of the release of the Kukutuntum, the Ancestral Jurisdiction. Our foundational work, which our other works are based upon, the Kukutuntum Ancestral Jurisdiction, Ubensheng, the Ancestral Summons, and Wabojida, Pa Nsamai Atimu, the Ancestral Judgment. Those 3 are the foundation upon which all of our 30 books are based, as well as everything that we are doing, over 100 articles and hundreds of broadcasts and so forth, and the upcoming film and everything that we will be doing is based foundationally upon that work. So we talked about initially, in the first broadcast, this notion of AFU AUSAR, AFU meaning flesh, also house or place of residence, the flesh or the body of AUSAR. We talked about how AUSAR's body, of course, was separated or divided when he's operating through the star system or the constellation called Sa or Sahu, misnomered Orion. He's called Ausar Sa. Ausar operating through the constellation Sa. Ausar possessing the constellation Sa. When he's operating through that constellation, then he's operating through those 16 stars, the 12 stars of the 12 deities who they are attendants of Ausar Sa, and then the 4 sons of Heru who are part of that complex. Those are those 16 stars, 16 parts of the body of the divinity and so forth. So we talked about that last night in some detail. We talked about the 16 divisions of the body in relationship to the 14 divisions when Ausar is possessing the Ajo, or possessing the moon, then operating through the moon and the dispensation of energy moving through the moon through that 28-day cycle, plus the new moon cycle. That's a dispensation of lunar energy. This is where the 14 divisions comes from. But when you're talking about the division of the body, not the division of the lunar light and so forth, but the division of the body of Ausar, you're talking about Ausar operating through the star system Sa, misnomered Orion, and those 16 parts of the body are those 16 divinities. And of course, that major star system within is Betel Guis, as they would say, is the star of Ausar, and the 16 deities are the 16 parts of the body of Ausar and so forth. And we went into some detail about that last night. But then there's another section that we wanted to deal with. So as we said, we're going to release that article, the AFU AUSAR article this week. But one more piece to that is this notion of Ausar Sekri, a form of Ausar. So when we talked about yesterday in the Pert Imheru, Runu Pert Imheru, so-called Book of the Coming Forth by Day, misnomer Book of the Dead, we showed in that particular chapter where you have the 7 cows, the 7 Kaitu, which are the 7 Pleiades, the 7 Het Heru, in the form of 7 sacred cows. Then you also have the sacred bull, the sacred Ka. That is the so-called constellation of Taurus. Then right next to that, you have the so-called 4 rudders of the sky, but sometimes in other texts, you have the 4 sons of Heru right in front of the 12 deities who are the Sa deities, or the attendants of Ausar when he's operating through the constellation of Sa. And those are the stars in the body of Orion, and then, the 4 sons of Heru, the rudders of the sky, the whites and offspring, misnomer, the shield of Orion, but they have a misunderstanding of that reality and promote that misunderstanding. So we showed in that particular text, in that particular chapter, that when you look at the imagery of the chapter, and we also showed that the offering table is the quote-unquote Orion or Sahu nebula in the right place and so forth. So when you look in that particular chapter, you'll find that it's laid out according to the proper map of the sky when it's right side up. You will see that it's laid out properly. Now, at the end of that, and you'll see it's in plate number 37. Plate number 37 in the papyrus of Ani, which is the final plate in the papyrus of Ani, which is what we were talking about last night, but that last portion of the plate, when we were showing Ausar standing there in his pavilion, and we said it's Sekri Ausar, as he's titled there, also Ausar Sekri and so forth. He's standing there in the pavilion. He's the Betel Guis star. Above him is Rigel, which is the falcon-headed divinity, which is Heru. Nech Atef F, which is Heru, the avenger of his father, protector of his father, and so forth. So you see those two, the reddish star and the whitish bluish star, those two bright stars in the Sa constellation, or so-called Orion constellation. Then you have the other stars that make up that part of the body and so forth. And then you have, the four sons of Heru, which are the so-called shield of Orion. So you have the entire setup. But when he's as Ausar Sekri, or Sekri Ausar, sitting in the pavilion or standing in the pavilion mummified, this is another piece with regard to that notion of 16 symbol divination. He's standing there mummified and his body is preserved. Now, as Ausar Sekri, that gives you a direct relationship to what's going on. In the imagery of the show, the promotional image of the show, we decided to use the symbol of the Hindu boat. We use the symbol of the Hindu boat because that Hindu boat, when you look at the symbolism, is the sacred vessel of the deity Sekar or Sikar. In Akan, it's Abosom Sikar. We did a broadcast on Abosom Sikar, the deity Sikar. He's a divinity in the underworld that he governs goldsmiths and so forth, preservation of the body, preservation of the mummified body, purified body, and so forth. Sikar means golden. Akan, he's a divinity that governs gold, but that gold is not only gold within the soil, which is pure and never decays and so forth, but it's also that golden solar energy that's moving through the underworld, carried within the mummified, purified, preserved body of Ausar, that revivifying energy that's with you even when you're, quote unquote, in the underworld, when you have gone under, that allows the person to preserve themselves in a purified fashion, so when they reincarnate, they still are intact. They haven't been attacked, just like a physical body can be attacked by maggots and other entities and destroyed and suffer decay. But if it's properly mummified, purified, preserved, and so forth, then that body can last for thousands of years, as it's been proven by our ancestors and ancestors. Your spirit body can be inoculated in the same fashion when you live in harmony with order and protect yourself. You build up your spiritual immunity. You have that solar energy of Ra and Rayat moving through your spirit body, and you're preserved, you're protected, you repel any negative energy, and you preserve that Sa, that spirit body, that Sahu, and so forth. That solar energy moving through you while you're in the spirit realm of the underworld and your ancestral realm and so forth is governed by Sikar, Sekar, or Sekar, and so forth. The Hindu boat is the sacred vessel of Sekar. Now, and you go back to the pyramid text and so forth, when you look at that Hindu boat, what you'll see, if you look closely, you'll see that it carries the physical flesh body, or the AFU body of Ausar in the underworld. And once again, the falcon-headed divinity is over the casing where Ausar's body is in, and then you see that oryx, which is a form of antelope, hoofed animal and so forth, which is at the prow of the boat, and you see the long horns, and then we show a Nubian ibex, which is a form of that kind of animal, that sacred animal that carries, which is at the prow of the boat, of the Hindu boat, that carries the Afu, the flesh body of Ausar. So, here's the piece. The preserved body of Ausar, the mummified body of Ausar, the intact body of Ausar. His body is cut into 16 pieces, but then when they're pulled back together and mummified and unified and so forth, wholly intact, then he can execute his function and continue to execute his function as he who regulates order in creation, has a regulatory function in creation, establishes civilization through regulatory order. And Auset, who is the wife of Ausar and he's the husband of Auset, she perpetuates civilization in regulatory order. So that establishment of civilization and the continuity of civilization, the expansion and contraction and so forth from Ausar and Auset, this is what's taking place. We talked about him operating through, in the physical body, the endocrine system. We talked about the 16 parts of the endocrine system, which is a system that regulates order within the body, and all the different parts interface to regulate order within the body. Internally, that's the system governed by Ausar, governed by Awusi and so forth. And then we talked about there's an external manifestation for these 16 parts of Ausar. Now, we want to pull up some information real quick. Give me 1 second because I had the piece out. I'm going to pull it back up. And as we're going through that, you can look at the, okay, here it is. All right. So we talked about in the Dendera text, in the sanctuary or temple of Dendera in ancient Kemet, in the southern part of Kemet, they would have the so-called mysteries of Ausar, or the sacred ritual practices of Ausar, the mummification of the body and so forth, and they would make little molds of bread and so forth, 16 different molds for the 16 different parts of the body in the sanctuaries where or the regions of the country where the body parts of Ausar were found. Then a shrine was established in each one of those 16 places, and we talked about how every part of the body of Ausar was found and so forth. So in different texts, you'll find these different parts of the body. These parts of the body are the external manifestations of what's happening internally, which is these 16 parts of the endocrine system that we laid out in part 2. In one of the texts, the 16 parts of the body, and this is very instructive with regard to this notion of healing, 16 symbol divination. 16 parts of the body of Ausar is number 1, his head, 2, the soles of his feet, 3, his bones, 4, his arms, 5, his heart, 6, his interior, 7, his tongue, 8, his eye, 9, his hand, 10, his fingers, 11, his back, 12, his ears, 13, his loins, 14, his body, 15, his head with the face of a ram, 16, his hair, which is, of course, is sacred, and we did a post on hair today. We're going to get into that piece as well. Now, these different external manifestations of the body of Ausar, of course, internally you have the internal organs that are regulating order within the body, and what's happening externally is a manifestation of that. When we talk about the preservation through mummification and the pulling of the different pieces of the body together into a unified whole, once again, so that deity, that force in creation can regulate order and radiate its energy that regulates order and all natural cycles of renewal on the planet and so forth, which Ausar does. That's the basis of 16 symbol divination all over West Africa, also in Central and South, North and East and so forth. We talked about that, the Erin Dilogun in the Yoruba tradition, as well as the Ikim, palm nuts, and Ifa divination, and Afa and Igbo. You know, those 16 symbols. You have those same 16 symbols, divination in Mali and so forth. Various parts of the continent of Africa, and even when we are forced into the Western Hemisphere, you still have these forms of divination and different things are used. If you don't have cowrie shells that you used to have when you were living in West Africa, if you don't have access to cowrie shells in America, then you'll utilize what you have. So you end up utilizing maybe cockle shells, which are seashells, used very, prolifically in the hoodoo tradition in North America. You also use possum bones, which are used prolifically in the hoodoo tradition in North America. Other people use different things in different traditions in Vodun and different bones, forms of bones or stones, crystals, different things. Whatever we have access to in this region of the Earth Mother's body, as Afrikani people, wherever we go to on the Earth Mother's body. We interface with her, the fertile Earth Mother, as well as the barren Earth Mother, AFU and AUSAR. We learn from them what aspects of their body and this region of their body we can utilize for divination. They show us how to procure it, when to procure it, and so forth. We do that, and we incorporate that as part of our divinatory practice, just as we did when we migrated from East Afuraka, thousands of years ago, to West Afuraka, as well as South and Central. We had to interface with the unique expression of the Earth Mother's body in the Western region when we hadn't lived in the Western region of the continent for thousands of years. And we were living in ancient Khanid and Kemet. We lived there for thousands of years, and then some of us migrated west. We were in a new area that we hadn't been to in thousands of years. So we had to acclimate ourselves there. And the same thing happens when we are forced in the Western Hemisphere, North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, as well as Europe, wherever we were forced. We have to acclimate ourselves to the Earth Mother divinities and their unique expression, this part of their body over here. So we will use cockle shells or seashells, we'll use possum bones, we'll use other forms of bones, we'll use certain crystals, we'll use whatever we need to use to replicate these different systems of divination. There are different systems, some using 4 shells, some using other numbers and so forth. We're just talking about tonight this notion of 16 symbol divination. But this is what we've done. But we also, some of us, find ourselves in a position on plantations in North America and so forth where we didn't have access, even also being inland and so forth. Certain places we may be inland in Alabama or inland in Mississippi or inland in Georgia and so forth, not by a body of water, not by any river, but not by any by an ocean front or not by the Gulf and so forth. We don't have even access to seashells. We don't have access to any of that, especially when we first get on the plantation. Even when we escape into some, lagoon or into some forest or into some area where we establish ourselves, a swamp area and so forth, clear out some land and establish ourselves, we may still have been in an area where we don't have access to these things. But even before we escape, when we're just purifying ourselves and getting back on track, or even sometimes we move to an inner city hundreds of years later and move into some inner city, we don't have access ocean front or lakefront and so forth. The only thing we may have access to is a river or a stream, and there are no shells or anything like that. But there's a form of 16 symbol divination that we continue to utilize. It's directly related to Ausar Sekri, the mummified body, the 16 parts of the body, and those 16 parts, as we just laid out externally, the head and the hand and the eyes and the ears and the tongue and the mouth and the soles of the feet and the loins and chest and so forth. These are dealing with the gateways to that which is internal. And those 16 gateways that we utilize through laying hands is a form of divination. We've been laying hands to heal for thousands of years. You can see Anpu, for example, laying hands over the body of Ausar when he's mummified. He's engaged in that laying hands process. And of course, our sister Rekit Kajara Nia Ya Nebetet has Ra Seki, Kemetic Reiki, showing that the laying of hands goes back thousands of years. It has nothing to do with any pseudo-Asians. Our people have been laying hands, and it's documented all over ancient Kemet and Khanid thousands of years before Asians came into existence in the world, these white Asians. So she has Ra Seki Volume 1, Volume 2, and so forth, a number of different books, has been healing people for years, for over 10 years and so forth. So that notion of laying hands to purify, to heal, we've been engaged in that process. We continued that process. That is a form not only of just simply healing, projecting energy to, restore balance where imbalance has occurred and so forth, to kill certain, parasitic cells and so forth, viral agents and so forth. Not only that process, but it's also beyond just the healing process. It is also a form of divination, a form of ADEBISA. And ADEBISA, once again, is inquiry, meaning when you're utilizing your hands over certain areas of the body to communicate with the organs and systems within the body, because those are shrines of the divinities in the body. They are relay stations of the energy of the divinities in the body. So just like someone can cast some shells and hold the shells in their hand, or engage in water gazing, another major form of divination and so forth, we can also place our hands over the bodies even without touching. Whether you touch or you do not touch, placing the hands over the body, feeling the energy of the different energy centers, and communicate not only with the person's Ka'et, soul, divine consciousness, and the divinities that are connected with the person, the ancestresses and ancestors who are connected with the person, but also connecting with the major forces in creation that govern those 16 parts of AUSAR's body. We have those 16 parts, and they come through 16 ports. And those 16 ports, or entry ports of energy, or Tumi, divine power, or Ashe, as they say in Yoruba, Tumi, as we say in the Akan tradition, they are found throughout all over the body. What are those 16 ports or entry ports for that energy? They are laid out or alluded to in that list of 16 parts of AUSAR's body. So when we didn't have 16 calories, or we didn't have 16 cockle shells, we didn't have 16 crystals and so forth, we take our hands and we place them over the 16 parts of the collective, recollected, or remembered, or reconstituted body of AUSAR, the 16 parts of the body, and we can get that information from the Abosom and Nananom and Samafo, the Orisha and Egungun, the Bodu and Kuvito, and so forth, the Ntoru, and the Akhuamuman, the deities and ancestral spirits. The ports of entry, you have, starting from the top, well, first and foremost, the two hands. You can receive energy through the hands. You can project energy through the hands. Those are two ports right there, powerful ports. Then going to the head region, two more ports, reception and transmission of energy through those ports are the two eyes. The next two ports, so that's four. Then you have two more ports in the head region. That is, of course, the ears. And the two ears lead to the two ear canals, which lead to the vestibular system in the left and right ear. That is the balancing system. That is the Usek Ma'ati, or the dual hall of Ma'at. And when you look in the text of ancient Kemet, the Runu Pert Imheru, as we have proven, and we're the first to prove that, when they're talking about the dual hall of Ma'at leading to the center of balance in the body, when they show two halls of Ma'at in the text, those two halls in the physical body are the two ear canals leading to the vestibular system, which is the system in the left ear canal and right ear canal. That is the balancing system within the body. So the two ears, where we receive that divine sound vibrations that stimulate our organs and systems and our spirit and so forth, that's another port of entry, two ports of entry of the energy of Ra and Ra'at, and therefore we're able to harmonize with the forces in creation and the ancestors and ancestors. So the two hands, that's two. Then two eyes, that's four. The two ears, that's six. Then, of course, you have the shrine on the face, which is the nose, which breathes in that Ankh, that life, that divine living energy. Of course, we're dependent on that nose and so forth, and this is why one of the titles of Tehuti, as we show in our book, Tehuti, Sankofa, Fa, and Ifa, we show how Sankofa, Fa, and Ifa, and Akan, and Yoruba, and Vodun, and so forth, is the same divinity. He is called Fant, Fanti, or Fant, which is he of the great nose, and of course the great beak of the habui bird, the ibis, that is scratching along the ground, digging up under the surface. And when you have divination and you're scratching certain symbols within the soil or the sand, those certain symbols are sacred symbols, like Adinkra symbols, Veves, misnomer sigils and so forth that draw the energy in their geometric forms of the Abosom and Nsamanfo to that space, becomes a sacred shrine. He is one of the great nose, the one who can perceive through the nose, to smell, to perceive, to attune to what's taking place. Even if you're you have a sense of smell, just like an animal with a great sense of smell, they can pick up on something that's harmonious or disharmonious, something that's harmonious or something that's rotten, and so forth. So it has those dual functions. So, of course, the nose is a sacred shrine. It's directly connected in that regard with the Hootie, but all of the 16 parts and ports are governed and regulated by Ausar, just like all of the organs, glands that make up the endocrine system, the overarching force in creation that regulates the whole system, is Awus. So now you have the nose, which is a port of entry of that divine living energy. And then, of course, you have the aro, or the mouth, which is a port of entry, receiving but also transmitting divine sound vibrations that provoke the energy of the divinity through ritual song, ritual prayer, ritual chant, incantation, and so forth. Sound vibrations are powerful when they're properly modulated, properly calibrated. They provoke the energy of the Abosom and Nanonom Nsamanfo so that we can attune to and communicate with them and learn and become healed by them and so forth. So far you have the hands, which is 2 ports of entry, the eyes, that's 4, the ears, which is 6, and then the nose and the mouth, that's 7 and 8. Then you go down a little bit further, and you have the 2 left and right nipples of the male and female. Recall in our text dealing with the deity Nekebet, who is called Abba in Akan, and she's also called Neki, she of the pendulous breast, and so forth. We've talked about just like the primary function of the nose is breathing. The secondary function of the nose is smelling. In the same fashion, the primary function of the breast area or the chest area with the 2 nipples, the primary function is not breastfeeding. That's the secondary function. The primary function is the fact that you have a right and left nipple, which are no different than the positive and negative nodes of a 9-volt battery. They are directly over the lungs that stimulate that energy within the lungs. These are positive and negative poles that receive and transmit to me or divine power. They are ports of entry that stimulate the heart-lung complex. The secondary function is breastfeeding, and that only is going on for a certain period of a woman's life. The first part of her life leading up to puberty, of course, she's not breastfeeding. Then when puberty happens and she's having a menstrual cycle and so forth, she has the capacity to breastfeed, and she does that when she has children for a certain number of years. Then at some point, a number of years later, menopause happens and she's no longer breastfeeding. So a certain portion of her life, she has the capacity to breastfeed. That is a secondary function, but the primary function of the nipples are positive and negative poles, electromagnetic poles that receive and transmit energy to stimulate the heart and lung complex as shrines of specific forces in creation, Nekebet and Wachet, or Abba and Ya, or Ayaba and Avejida, or Oba and Oya, in our various traditions, regulating that area. So those are 2 more ports of entry, so that's 9 and 10. Then you have another singular point of entry, which is the navel, which goes directly into that entire enteric endocrine system. We talked about the gastrointestinal tract, which is the largest endocrine organ in the body, millions of cells and so forth. The navel leads directly into that area. Sacred shrine, of course, when people are generating fire energy, born in that cauldron and so forth, ritually, it's taking place in that area. So that's the next point of entry. So you have the 2 hands, 1 and 2, the 2 eyes, 3 and 4, ears, ports of entry, 5 and 6, the nose and the mouth, which is 7 and 8. Then you have the right and left part of the chest, the two nodes, positive and negative, electromagnetic, and so forth. Nipples, that's 9 and 10. Then you have the navel area, which is another port of entry, originally connected, of course, through the umbilical cord to the placenta. Remember, we talked about the placenta is actually an endocrine organ as well. And after the placenta is, cut off because of the umbilical cord being cut and so forth, there's a cult of the divine placenta where it's preserved and kept in a sacred sanctuary with the Amsu, with the king throughout the course of his life. Of course, we continued that process even here in the Western Hemisphere when the placenta is, birthed and so forth, and the umbilical cord is cut. People will preserve the placenta and then bury the placenta and so forth, and sometimes people would preserve and hold on to the umbilical cord as well. But that's that direct link to the gastrointestinal tract, but the enteric endocrine system, which is a sacred region and organ of the endocrine system, including the divine endocrine system governed by Ausar. So that's 11. Then you have the gonads of the male, gonads of the female. The testes of the male, testes of the female, or ovaries of the female. Of course, they are holding the sperm cells, which are, magnets for various ancestresses and ancestors of the patriclan for the male, which will become the patriclan for the child and so forth when he contributes the sperm cell and so forth. And, of course, the ovaries, holding the eggs, the ova, that are magnets for the ancestresses and ancestors of what will become the matriclan when she contributes that egg. So when the sperm and the egg unite, the patriclan, energy and the matriclan energy unite through the sperm and ovum and so forth. But, of course, those are resonant centers that receive and transmit energy. They are factories of not only life, but energy itself. So you have that 2 hands, 2 eyes, 2 ears, nose and the mouth. Then you have the 2 nipples and so forth. Then you have the navel. Then you have the gonads of the male or the gonads of the female. And then, of course, in the male, you have the sex organ itself, the phallus organ, the kote, or the ka is called in ancient Kemet. Or you have the kaet, the vagina and uterus structure of the female, the reproductive structure of the female, receiving and transmitting energy for life. Of course, the instruments of life, the physical instruments of life through which all of us are brought here and so forth, specific divinities governing that. And then, of course, you have the soles of the feet, the 2 soles of the feet. So when you count these different, portions, these are the 16 body parts of Ausar that would divide it. When you look at the list of the body parts as they're listed in the text, they're directly related to these energetic points of entry into not only the physical body, but the spirit body. And what happens is, because we have these 16 different points, when we don't have access to cowrie shells sometimes, or don't have access to, Akan or palm nuts or whatever it is, or sometimes simply because this is the form of divination that we use, we take our hands and place them over these 16 points of entry, placing the hands by the feet, at the soles of the feet. This notion of reflexology and so forth comes from us not only washing the feet and so forth. That's a ritual practice that has nothing to do with the Bible. Our people have been doing that for thousands of years. Some people utilize that in and of itself as a form of divination, washing feet and so forth, but even placing the hands near the feet without touching, picking up on that energy and so forth, placing the hands to these various points of entry, energetic entry points, over the eyes, over the ears, the nose, the mouth, the area of the chest, the navel area, the reproductive area, the feet area, and so forth. And when the hands are placed into these different areas, you can receive and transmit energy. You can transmit energy for healing purposes. You can receive energy with regard to the inquiry, with regard to communicating with not only that organal structure, but the divinities that govern that organal structure, and ancestresses and ancestors who carried that energy into the world when they were here and are still connected to the whatever major divinity governs that organal structure. That includes when people can lay hands and communicate and find out whether or not a sister is pregnant or not, find out whether or not there are twins in the womb, find out whether or not there's an issue with regard to the pregnancy even before there's an ultrasound and so forth. Our people have been doing that for thousands of years. That form of what our sister Rekik Kajara Nia Ya Nebet will call Ra Sekri, utilizing the energy of Ra and Sekhmet, that expansion and contractive energy, that power, that life force energy, in order to perceive, to inquire regarding the spirit body on what's going on with the person, where are the imbalances, where are the, the energy, the blockages and so forth, how to remove those blockages, how to purify ourselves and so forth. This is what we've been doing, placing our hands over the 16 parts of the body of AUSAR, unifying them energetically by utilizing our hands or laying hands so we can divine, so we can find out what's going on within the body of the person. It's no different than playing an organ or playing an accordion and so forth, or playing a harp. You're playing or plucking the energy centers of the body. You're connecting with them with the hands and so forth without even touching the body and so forth. That's no different in the process of manipulating 16 shells. You're manipulating 16 entry points of the energy of the Abosom and the Nanonoman Samanfo in the body of the person. So that body is no different than a divination tray or a divination bowl, where shells are cast into water into a bowl, or on a divination tray, where, nuts are cast, palm nuts are cast on a divination tray and so forth. Well, in this particular fashion, the tray is the body itself, and the 16 points of entry are those 16 cowrie shells, or those 16 palm nuts, or those 16 cockle shells, or 16 stones or crystals and so forth. We've been engaged in 16 symbol divination in North America, even when we didn't have the symbols or the actual implements. We utilized the entry points of the energetic entry points of the body, the 16 different points: 2 hands, 2 eyes, 2 ears, nose, mouth, 2 nipples in the chest region, the navel, the gonad region, the sex organ region of male and female, and the soles of the feet and so forth. We utilize that to heal as well as to learn, to educate ourselves, to find out what's going on with the spirit of the individual. So we've never stopped utilizing the 16 parts of AFU AUSAR, the body of AUSAR. We just wanted to recap that and wrap that up. All of that is going to be included in this article, which we didn't get a chance to finish that. We're going to release it this week, though, but we wanted to at least get the information out so that you could get that information and incorporate it and utilize it and verify it for yourself. But that's what we wanted to cover. If you have any questions on the phone line, hit the number 1. If you have any questions in the chat room, you can log in and place a question in the chat room. But that was the key piece. Most of our people assume that the only form of, 16 symbol divination is coming out of, Nigeria and so forth. Or some people have known about certain forms of that in different parts of the continent, but they didn't know the cosmological foundation of AUSAR being carved up into 16 pieces, directly connected with Sa, so-called Orion, the 16 stars and so forth that make up the body of AUSAR, but also the 16 parts of the body that we utilize for divination itself when we are, quote-unquote, laying hands, whether we're physically touching the areas or just having our hands right above the area to pick up the energy of those different shrines in the body and within the body and upon the body. So we have a phone call. Hold on one second. Michio on the phone line, number 2081. You had a question or comment?
Yes, Odwirafo. Actually, one question I had to ask. I noticed that there was a message that I got notification and happy Earth Strong to your mother. One thing, because is she in like this journey like very deep in spirit, like you, Odwirafo?
Well, she's been learning the information just as we have been putting that information out. She's been getting those kinds of details, but of course, whether it was her or on my father's side and people, certain people within the family on both sides, there were always people on both sides of the family who were involved to some degree in the hoodoo tradition. And then, of course, you have some people who were not involved in it, or they suppressed certain things for a number of years. But then once we started putting this kind of information out in detail and proving that this tradition, this hoodoo tradition, is the tradition of the Akhan people in West Africa, and is the tradition of ancient Khanat, the Undu tradition of ancient Khanat or Nubia, and then just showing the unity of Afrikani ancestral religious practices across the board on the continent, but also in the Western Hemisphere. We're able to show that what we've been doing all along, even the terms that we use in the hoodoo tradition like mojo and jackball and haint and all these different things, and Gufa dust and Gufa doctor and all these different things are all Akan terms, but just showing that and proving it. And we already have the living experience of ancestral communication, spirit possession, laying hands, rabbit's foots, root work, conjure, all these different things. Since we have a lived experience already, and people's had that intergenerationally, then yes, they began to see that it's the real deal. And now what we're putting out is just giving more contour and more nuance, definition to what we've already been living.
Okay. One thing in regards to the chest area, where there's a positive and negative in regards to men and women, isn't it at times now this goes to certain women that might, I'm not sure if there's an abnormality when most women, let's say, if they're not nursing, once they become conceived and give birth, they sometimes still feel the effects, they still lactate even after pregnancy or before getting pregnant. Isn't that a disorder for most of them that lactate while even giving birth?
You said it's a disorder when they lactate without giving birth?
Yeah, like some women do have this, before, like, they actually produce milk and then not even producing like a child, like, there are stories like, I'm not sure if that's sort of like a health issue, because usually the breast only has two things, positive, negative, and some to carry nurse a child. But there are stories, cases where someone might just lactate without even carrying. So I'm not sure if that's like a health issue or that's like some type of disorder. That's my question.
Well, it depends. It depends because some, for example, some women they may have a child, they may be nursing a child and so forth. Some women nurse children for a certain period. They may nurse them for a year or more than a year. Some people less than a year. And then at some point they stop and then the milk begins to dry up. It just depends on the person. It depends on, their genes. It depends on their lifestyle. It depends on their health and so forth and what they've been doing. But then some may stop at a certain point and, they stop nursing their own children, but then someone else has a problem nursing their own children. And, back during enslavement and so forth, sometimes our people, we would have a wet nurse or a nurse mother who would nurse the other child in the community. If the other mother couldn't, we weren't pumping milk back then. So if the other mother could not nurse for health reasons for some reason or another, then you have a quote-unquote wet nurse who would nurse that child as well. Of course, the whites in our offspring in an abnormal fashion would force some of our women to nurse their white babies. People could stop nursing, but then because they continue engaged in that process with another child, the breast will keep, producing milk. But it's not necessarily a manifestation of disorder. It just depends on the health of the woman and what's actually going on. because women can nurse longer than a year or 2 years or even up to 3 years. Sometimes, some even go longer than that. But typically it's like, up to around 2 years or something. It just depends on the person. So it really depends on what's going on. It's not the lactation or the breast continuing to produce milk after, 9 months or 10 months or a year. That's not, abnormal in general.
Okay. All right. Well, you answered all my questions. Thank you again. That's it.
Okay, doctor. Appreciate the call. Okay. And we have another call on the phone line. Michelle on the phone line, number 0156. You got a question or a comment?
Hello?
Okay, number 0. Yes.
Oh, peace. What's up, Odwirafo?
What's up?
About these the hoodoo systems. I see that there are other what appear to be more advanced hoodoo systems, such as the Dagomba Kingdom, where they work with they prepare fetishes in their hoodoo system for certain class of spirits called jinns. Is this an indigenous practice here in North America? Also, where they prepare the fetish in hoodoo for these spirits called jinns.
Okay, did you say the Dagomba, like Dagomba?
Yes, sir. The Dagomba in northern Ghana.
Right. Okay. So now, just technically, we just make this distinction, even though after a while, terms like juju, voodoo, hoodoo, wanga began to just be used just in general for any practice that our people were doing here in North America. But we're going back to the original definition. So hoodoo is Akan ancestry. When Akan people came to North America, they continued Akan ancestry religion. That's hoodoo. When Yoruba people came to North America, they continued to use their language to call their tradition juju, which is Yoruba. Voodoo is Ebe and Fon. Wanga come from the Abambo people and so forth. And, of course, there are, black people came from the Dagomba people as well and came over here, and continued to practice their ancestral religious practices as well. Now, what has happened in northern Ghana, as well as, central and southern and different parts of the continent, depending on where you are, you'll find that a lot of our people got involved, just like they did over here. They got involved in either Christianity or they got involved in Islam or Judaism or something, and they've corrupted their practices with that. So just like over here, for example, in the West, in Haiti, French Catholicism, you'll see them, placing the Loa or the deities under, images of white so-called saints, that kind of nonsense, which the Loa, the deities, never sanctioned. You'll find in Lukumi, in Cuba, for example, some of them who are in the Santeria, quote-unquote Santeria tradition, they'll utilize white saints and try to, force the Orisha up under white saints, which the Orisha never sanctioned, but some people went ahead and did that anyway, which is a corrupt practice. You'll find hoodoo in North America, because most black people in North America, even though you had a small percentage of them who got involved in Catholicism, but the majority of our people got involved in Protestant Christianity, and because the majority of our people got involved in that, then some of our people started, subsuming certain hoodoo practices up under Protestant Christianity. So they're using the Bible and using Psalms and engaging in laying hands and, spirit possession at holiness churches and so forth, and Pentecostal churches and stuff like that, and doing ring shouts inside of the churches, but utilizing the Bible and different scriptures, which is a corrupt practice. Of course, the characters in the Bible never existed, so it has no power whatsoever, so it's nothing more than a prop, a misguided prop or misplaced prop. But the same thing happened in Ghana, Nigeria, different places. In northern Ghana, they got dominated by Islam, so therefore they began to engage and corrupt the tradition with that. So even the terminology jinn, that's coming from Islam, talking about the jinn spirits. So when they utilize that terminology, they're utilizing Arabic. They're utilizing a foreign language. They've done that in northern Ghana a lot, but they've done that in the southern part of Ghana as well, central and southern as well. So what ends up happening is when people are incorporating Islam or Christianity or Judaism and different things like that, or Hinduism, which some of them have done as well. Some of them have done that in Togo and Benin, and you see them using, Krishna and little white spirits and images in shrines in Vodou and Togo and Benin and so forth, which is nonsensical. What has happened is when they're still incorporating fake traditions and trying to incorporate that or meld that into our ancestral culture, what ends up happening is the shrines of the actual divinities, if you keep trying to force, that nonsense, then the actual deities will, depart from the shrines. So whether you have an actual shrine or you have sculptures or what they would call fetishes, which are, portable shrines, mobile shrines, so to speak, the spirits of the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors depart from that. The spirits of the Abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, the deities depart from that. Now you have empty shrines and empty mobile shrines, which are, called fetishes from the Portuguese term fetico, which, that's just their terminology. But once they become empty, then the only spirits that can take up residence in a mobile shrine or a so-called fetish, or, a sculpture or a shrine established originally for a deity, but the deities have left, the only kind of spirits that can take up residence in an empty shrine are transient spirits. No different than if somebody abandoned a house and it's all boarded up. Then transient homeless people will come and pull a board down, and then they'll go and live in the house. And they may be doing crack or doing whatever they're doing, heroin or, crystal meth or whatever it is. They're not the original inhabitants of the house, but they are dwelling there. So if somebody went and knocked on the door, they would get an answer. Somebody's in the house, and somebody's communicating. If they say, hey, can I come in? They say, yeah, you can come in. So, and they'll have an interaction with them. And they may be the original owners until they get robbed or something. So what ends up happening is when you're trying to incorporate Islam or Christianity or Judaism, you make yourself repulsive to real deities. And then these discarnate, wayward, uncultivated spirits, very often passing themselves off as deities, are taking up residence in these shrines and so-called fetishes, or in Akan they're called Asumai, the so-called, talismans, fetishes, and so forth. And then people are communicating with these spirits and passing them off as deities. Somebody who was a child molester, somebody who was an alcoholic, or somebody who was self-destructive when they were alive, they died, and now their spirit is hanging around, and they conscript that person to work with them through that fetish, and they'll kill an animal and sacrifice an animal, send them a little bolt of energy so they can keep doing things for them. That's who these people are working with. So if they've included white pseudo-religion in their practice, then the deities are not present, and the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors are not present, and the only spirits left are transient, wayward, uncultivated spirits that they're passing off as deities. Now, when it comes to hoodoo in North America, or the different traditions like juju and wanga and vodou and so forth, the notion of establishing sculptures or quote-unquote what they would call fetishes, but we utilize different terms, we have that as well. For example, the Akwamu doll, which they'll call a fertility doll. In Akan culture, the wooden doll that looks like an ankh, that's where it comes from. That's called a hoodoo doll baby in the hoodoo tradition. And we still utilize them. Some of them are wooden, but then very often we started making them with cloth because we didn't have access, to sit down and be carving, having a carving session on a plantation. We weren't able to do that. So we'll grab some fabric, sew a doll. That's something you can sew real quick and hide it, fill it up with medicine roots and things like that, and do what you needed to do. And then, of course, in Vodou, they would call it a quote-unquote voodoo doll. In the Wanga tradition, they call it a Wanga doll. So everybody has that, and there are different, shrines that we would utilize, certain natural shrines in nature, rivers, trees, streams, mountainous regions and things like that. But then some people would fashion specific, forms of medicine from plant life, build a earth shrine and so forth, or would even fashion little dolls and so forth. So we continue doing that.
Odwirafo, I have seen the Hoodoo Master Shrine and it looks amazing. It looks pretty advanced, where he takes different roots and herbs and sticks and compiles them and works with different spirits, works with jinns and other spirits. Now, I've also seen the Sufi of Islamic mysticism. I've seen his fetish also. Now, the fetish of the Sufi Muslim, his fetish is what they call in Ghana, in the Dagomba, they call the Sufi Muslims fetish, they refer to it as a zuli. And it's made of a completely different material. It's not made of roots and sticks and herbs and things of that nature. It's made of a hair, a different type of hair from a horse. And the fetish looks even more advanced than the natural, the hoodoo master who he takes a traditional approach with his spirits. And when you compare the two, the Sufi versus the hoodoo master, the hoodoo master, he takes more of a traditional approach working with these spirits they call jinns, and he's more like a traditionalist, a healer.
Wait, now who are you referring to as the hoodoo master? Who is that you're referring to?
The hoodoo teachers that I've seen in North America that prepare these fetishes for jinns, these spirits, and they can roots and herbs and different things compiled together, they appear to be in competition with the Muslims who prepare their fetish.
But now, which people were you talking about in North America? You said it was certain ones in North America. Was it a certain group of people, or who were you talking about?
The hoodoo people in Atlanta, Georgia, who teach what's called the indigenous practices of North America, the hoodoo system. And supposed to be the indigenous practices of North America, and they prepare genie fetishes, and he prepares a shrine for these jinns and for the spirits of his ancestors. And they, like you said, the Muslims with the invasion of Islam in northern Ghana. Say that once again, because the call had dropped for like 20 seconds, and that happened last night as well. Sometimes Blog Talk does that. But when right after I asked the question, who were you talking about in North America, then the call dropped. So could you repeat? You were saying, so when you said the hoodoo master in North America, did you say somebody in Atlanta? What were you saying? Yeah, the hoodoo group in Atlanta.
Are you talking about the guy Amachi?
Yes.
Okay, now it makes sense what you're saying. Okay, so what he's doing is not hoodoo at all. He's utilizing that term. There was a time a number of years ago when he was using the term voodoo as well, but what he did was you've seen some of the videos and seen different things. He went to northern Ghana. Even when you look at his video talking about, what is hoodoo and what is voodoo, and he was talking about hoodoo comes from, indigenous black Americans here and the people from West Africa, and they blended their traditions because they, noticed they had similar traditions. That's 100% false, totally inaccurate. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Hoodoo is specifically Akan ancestral religion brought by Akan people in our blood circles, and the exact same tradition with the exact same language, unbroken from the Ghana and Ivory Coast region to North America, nonstop. So he doesn't understand that. When he all he did was he went to northern. Right. So I see that. And our traditions in general across the board are foundationally the same. We just have different languages and we lived in different regions, so we do certain things slightly different. But he went to northern Ghana. He connected with people who are engaged in pseudo-religion. They're not dealing with real deities. They're not dealing with cultivated ancestral spirits. They got involved in the Muslim nonsense. So what they're engaged in is dealing with uncultivated spirits that are not deities and passing them off as deities. So it's not, and he deals with crackers as well. He deals with the whites and their offspring and allowing them to be involved in his practice and so forth. So it has no value whatsoever. But when you see people, they'll do all kinds of things. But the key is what spirit is taking up a residence in the shrine that you fashion. It doesn't matter what material you use. You can use plant life, animal life, mineral life, or some combination thereof. But what spirit is taking up residence? Is it a spiritually cultivated ancestor or ancestors from your blood circle? Is it one of the forces in nature, one of the deities, the divine forces in creation that embody divine order? Or is it a wayward, discarnate spirit of an uncultivated, deceased relative or non-relative who's being passed off as a deity? That's what they're engaged in.
Okay.
And in fact, anybody who's talking about Sufism or anybody including anything Islamic or Christian or Judaic or Kabbalistic or whatever, anybody who's dealing with that, they're dealing with fraud. They're dealing with a perversion of a tradition. They're not dealing with any real deities, and they're not dealing with any cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. They're dealing with wayward, deceased, spiritually uncultivated spirits, basically homeless spirits. They're kind of homeless. When somebody's homeless, they're a drug addict and so forth, they die that way, then they're easily conscripted to do certain things for you. You can kill an animal for them, and they'll go and listen in on someone's conversation and come back to the priest, the priestess, so-called priest or priestess. And when the person comes to get some divination, they'll say, the spirit told me that you were worried about your job because you got fired yesterday at 3 o'clock. Just because the little crackhead spirit was listening in when you were on the phone talking about how you got fired at 3 o'clock. And then you go to the priest, and he tells you, hey, you got fired at 3 o'clock yesterday. And it blows your mind because how could he possibly know that? Even if the crackhead was alive and he walked over to your window and sat and listened to you on the phone talking about what happened to you at 3 o'clock, and he went back to the priest's house and say, hey, this is what went down, there's nothing magical about that. He just eavesdropped on you and left. When they make their transition, they can still eavesdrop on you and leave. And then when you go to the priest and he does his little ritual process and tells you what the spirits are telling him, then that locks you in because you think he has some connection to some deity he really doesn't have. He's working with a weak little uncultivated spirit. That's what they are engaged in. And anybody dealing with, anytime you hear jinn, anytime you hear Muslim, Sufism, esoteric Islam, esoteric Judaism, esoteric Christianity, metaphysical Christianity or, Hermeticism or whatever, you're dealing with people who don't know what they're talking about.
Okay. I've seen them do some amazing things. I've seen them bind spirits to rings and sell the spirit on the market. All kind of
that's proof positive. That right there is proof positive that what they're working with is not real deities, because the deity is not going to be bound and be sold as a commodity. Only an uncultivated spirit can be done like that. So a disembodied spirit, they can do things just like a physical person can do things, but when they separate from their physical body, they can do things and make things move around, and they can make somebody ill, or they can put pressure on you to make your stomach hurt or make you feel ill, and then somebody can go pay somebody to get the spirit to get away from you and you feel better again. They can do those kinds of things, and if people don't know what's happening, it's if somebody physically was.
So these spirits, they cannot be incorporated into these jinn spirits. They cannot be incorporated into hoodoo practice. Is that correct?
No, these are no different than if you think about your home and you had a family reunion and your relatives are in the house, a bunch of people, and then a couple of relatives who were, heroin addicts tried to, walk up in the house and start causing problems, they would get kicked out. They're not allowed to come into the house in a harmonious environment. When such spirits die, individuals die, they become spirits who are wayward and uncultivated. They're not allowed in the ancestral realm, in that region of the ancestral realm where the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors are, they're repelled from that. So they are walking around earthbound and aimless, just like they were walking around earthbound and aimless as a homeless person. And if somebody pays them to do something criminal, they'll go ahead and do it because they need some money and they need to get their next hit. And now they're earthbound and aimless as spirits. And when some little unscrupulous pseudo-priest or priestess said, I'll kill an animal for you to release some energy and give you an infusion of energy if you do this for me, then they will do it. And when people are not accustomed to seeing that happen, they will assume that because something took place as the result of a communication with a disembodied spirit, that disembodied spirit must be a deity. But in reality, they are not. They are uncultivated, disordered spirits that are working on a very low level, and they can't participate in anything harmonious. Okay. In fact, we go into some detail about that in our book, the Okra Complex, the Soul of Akan. All the books are free downloads, by the way. So we go into some detail about that and the related broadcasts on that to show the differences between spirits of order, spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors of your direct blood circle, the actual deities that govern creation, the forces of divine order, and then these little homeless crackhead type spirits who are running around trying to get some work, from people, trying to get hired out by some little unscrupulous priests or priestesses to do work for them. That's what they're involved in.
Okay. So that's not hoodoo at all what's going on in Atlanta, Georgia?
Not at all. It's not at all just based on practice in and of itself. It's not at all even based on classification because, hoodoo is Akan. But even if they were talking about traditional Dagomba religion, what they're doing is not traditional Dagomba religion. What they're practicing is the corruption of traditional Dagomba religion. Traditional Dagomba people do not work with quote-unquote jinn spirits or these disembodied, wayward little, relatives. They deal with actual deities, and they have terms in the Dagomba language for the actual deities. And they have terms in the Dagomba language for spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. These people are not dealing with traditional Dagomba religion. They're dealing with the corruption. They're like people, in Haiti or Cuba or something who decided they're going to start working with white, saints and start calling that voodoo. That's not voodoo because saints, white, fake little saints have nothing to do with voodoo. That's the corruption. So that's what they're doing. It's no different than that.
Okay.
Okay, so we appreciate that call. And the some of the broadcasts in relation to the books, we go into a lot of detail about that, those classifications.
All right, Odwirafo, appreciate it.
Okay, what's that? Gracias. Okay, so for a number of the broadcasts, when you look, of course, we have, I think this is like the 336th broadcast, and a number of the broadcasts that we've been doing since December when we started back up. So we took like eight months off of broadcasting. We started back up in the early part of December, the first week of December, around December 8th or something like that. So, and many of the broadcasts were dealing with specific deities that a lot of people are unfamiliar with, as well as other certain ritual practices. So we've been trying to get through a lot of that information that'll be in upcoming books. But a lot of the previous broadcasts, some of the earlier broadcasts, you'll see that we dealt with these in detail, and as well as in the books, details about the differences between these fake wayward spirits that are not really deities being passed off as deities. And it's not just in Ghana, it's all across the board. Wherever Christianity, Islam, white culture was introduced, just like when crack and heroin and, other drugs are introduced, some of our people will go along and start using that. Many of our people won't go along and start using that. But some of our people will start utilizing drugs, and then they'll start even trying to encourage other people to utilize it because they'll say, hey, this gives me a lot of energy. It gives you a different feeling, but it's not giving you energy. It's forcing your body to respond, and your body is trying to, have a response to sustain you while it's also trying to force that poison out the system, but you keep trying to introduce it. And there's a conflict that you're creating. Your body is waging war against itself, trying to keep you alive while it's also trying to, redouble its efforts to get the poison out the system. But eventually you deteriorate and you reach your demise or meet your demise. So the same thing is happening with these corruptions of ancestral tradition. They're passing them off as real tradition, but they are not. And of course, any Negro dealing with crackers, the whites and their offspring, or dissexuals, homosexuals, their pseudo-spiritual practice is 100% fraud. It's bankrupt. It has no value whatsoever. Because the deities and ancestral spirits do not communicate with, nor do they accept any of the whites and their offspring, white Europeans, white Americans, white Asians, white Hindus, white Arabs, white Asians, white Latinos, white Hispanics, white pseudo-Native Americans. No non-black people are accepted. They're repelled by the forces in nature. All of them, no matter what tradition you're part of, they're repelled by the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. They're repelled by the great mother and great father, supreme being, without exception. That has always been the case, and it always will be the case until the whites and their offspring become extinct, until we make them extinct. So that's a reality. And we go into detail about that in the books in Maranechi, Divine Law, Love, and Divine Hate. In fact, that particular book, the Divine Law, Love, and Divine Hate, Maranechi, that's where we go into detail in the latter part of the book about the distinction between these fake, wayward, spiritually uncultivated spirits of discarnate relatives and non-relatives being passed off as deities and the corruption of the tradition. So you can look out for that and you can identify it instantaneously, and then you don't have to waste any time entertaining these fools. You just know what's real. All right. So it's only a couple of minutes left in the broadcast, so we're going to end the broadcast here. Once again, so this is a 3-part series on AFU AUSAR 16, the 16th year of the Kuku Tuntum, the release. Of course, I'm a Kwesi, Kwasi, or servant of AUSAR, or child of AUSAR, born on the day of AUSAR, and so forth. So this being the 16th year of the release of the Kuku Tuntum, directly related to the 16 parts of AUSAR's body, we had to do this 3-part series dealing with 16 symbol divination, how we've maintained that. But also, this is our year that we are actually working on. We started last week. Finally, we started the filming process for our film on AMARUKAFO, ADEBISA, ADWUMADI, African American Ancestral Divination Project, that documentary film, where we're showcasing the divination systems that we preserved in our blood circles here in North America. Hoodoo, the Akan ancestral religion; Juju, the Yoruba ancestral religion; Voodoo, the Ebe and Fon ancestral religion; Wanga, the Obambo ancestral religion; and Gengang, the Fang ancestral religion in North America. Myself and Wabet, Seshat Tut Ankwajet, and Rekik Kajara Niya Nebehet, Mama Mawusi Ashakir, Voodoo Queen Kalinda Laveau, all of us will be in the film talking about our different forms of divination that we've preserved in our blood circles and our families and so forth, and how these divination systems and ancestral religion were the foundation for the wars of resistance, revolution, and resolution against the whites and their offspring, and forced the end of enslavement by us taking up metal armaments as well as using chemical and biological warfare, group work being the precedent set for that. If you support the work, if you benefited from the Kuku Tuntum at all in the past 16 years since it's been out, or benefited from the free book downloads, we've had thousands of downloads and so forth on a monthly basis. If you take a couple of minutes right now, we're asking you to take a couple of minutes right now to go to the fundraiser crowdfund for our film, because we're in the process of filming. We started in Florida last week. We're trying to complete the filming process by Memorial Day weekend. We have our retreat in New Orleans on Memorial Day weekend. So we want to complete that process. We've had 130 people contribute. We have, hundreds of people on our list and thousands of people on our friends list. So please support that effort. And Yerase, we thank you for tuning into the broadcast. And Yebechi Abio, we will meet again. That's up.